Lenny, thank you so much for joining me here on the Modern Startup Marketing Podcast. Lenny, I've known Lenny for a while, more than 8 years now. Lenny Lebovich is the founder of Pre. And Pre is, just to give a little bit of background, is a Chicago-based company started in 2012 and has raised $1.4 million in funding.
No, it's a lot more than that.
Please
So
go ahead.
Pre to date has raised in excess of 15 million.
15 million. Okay, got it. It's not updated in Crunchbase, but
Crunchbase is basically back to probably when we raised our first funding in 2015.
Yes, that's probably what it is. Okay, so a lot more funding than I had thought. And so Pre is beef done differently. It's high quality grass-fed and finished beef. And it is sourced from farmers who raise their cattle on the pasture all year round, which is big. It's different from other meats out there. Pre products are available in more than 650 retail locations, retail outlets across 25 states. And they're on Amazon Fresh, and they're on Peapod, and it's also available direct to consumer on eatpre.com. So basically you could get it anywhere right now. So it's grown so much, Lenny, and I'm so excited to talk to you about this company that you started. And you and we met a while back in the Groupon building. I honestly cannot remember how we met, but I'm sure that we bumped into each other because I remember I was at the time working at Fuda, and there's all these different startups all around. There was like Uptake to the right. There were people from Instacart to the left, and you were probably maybe on the same floor. I can't remember, maybe a different one, but we talked every now and then. So
yes, I was located about 15 feet from the Instacart Chicago operation. And you were down the way working for Fuda at the time, and
yes.
I inevitably, talk to people. It's just a habit. I, distract them from their work and distract myself from mine. But in any case, that's kind of like the way that I kind of build relationships, just kind of having random, called water cooler conversations. And yeah, so we connected on, I think we share some common Eastern European roots. And marketing, right. And whatever.
That's right. Absolutely. No, it was really fun to get to know you, and we've stayed in touch ever since. So let's jump into it. First, I want to ask you, what does marketing mean to you?
Marketing means a lot of things to me, but I think that the answer to that question really comes down to the context in which marketing is deployed. Like, marketing in a, let's say, B2B business may be a lot different than marketing in a B2C business or in a consumer brand, or let's say in a CPG context. But I think at the end of the day, marketing is about communications, and and I think that one of the key, the art and science of marketing is figuring out who you want to talk to or talk with, and then what you want to talk with them about, and how you want to go about doing that. So that's I think fundamentally what marketing is, and I think marketing's fundamental goal at the end of the day is to drive enterprise value. So enterprise value could be in the form of top line revenue, could be in the form of kind of like higher margins, could be in the form of higher value for every dollar of revenue. Could be a retention focus. There's a lot of objectives, but at the end of the day, I think marketing is there to fundamentally drive enterprise value.
Absolutely. And before this jumping on here, we were talking on the phone a couple days ago, and we hit on this idea of marketing, and it's more than just this one area of your business. It really is your business, right? It's like your business strategy. I think you had mentioned this.
Yeah, well, I would say that as a brand, I would say that that's true. I'd say like if you're a B2B company and marketing is a function, a communications function, then I don't know that I would necessarily say that that is your business. But if you're a brand, then I think marketing and the brand, and they kind of go hand in hand, are your business.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we touched on the other day that I'll reiterate is that I think people grossly misunderstand marketing and brands particularly, and how they work and why they work. And at the end of the day, like I think, brand fundamentally is a promise that you're making to a specific audience. And your ability to build brand equity is a function of your ability to execute successfully on that brand promise over and over again. And over time, you build a relationship, you become a trusted brand. But in order to execute on a brand promise, that means that basically all aspects of the business that kind of basically drive that brand are able to deliver on that brand promise in combination. And I think marketers, talk about all these things as, I guess, brand touch points. There's lots of brand touch points. So a lot of people think of brands as it's a name on a package, it's a look and feel, it's whatever. It's a product. I'd say it's all of those things and many more things. It's everything you do is the brand. It's the product. It's the people. It's the communications. It's the look and feel. It's everything. It's the relationships you have internally and externally. And I've said this to people that I kind of coach, is that once you make the decision to be a brand, and you're the CEO, you're effectively the brand manager of the business, and you have to make sure that everything in the business is true to that brand. And that's hard to do.
Yeah,
I'd say
absolutely.
In order for them to be successful, there has to be a lot of what's called discipline. And what I found is that disciplined businesses, and discipline is also, I'd say, correlates with strategic, are much less common than opportunistic businesses that are by definition not strategic. And it's hard to build a brand if you're an opportunistic company. Brands are not opportunistic. They're long-term relationships. Opportunity, to me, is also associated with transaction. And if you're a transaction-minded business, I don't know how you're going to build a brand.
That's right. Beautifully said. I can't add anything more. I think that's very well said. So interesting, because when I was looking at your kind of thinking about what to say about you and looking on your LinkedIn profile, you don't write anything there in your about section. And while I know you, I wanted to get those pieces of information. But really where I got that information from is from people that recommend you. And so people that talk about you, because you don't write anything on your LinkedIn page, is that you've got so many different skills, from finance and deal structuring and strategy and brand building and management. And you're a really inspirational leader, it sounds like, from the people that know you and that you've led in the past. And so I just wanted to call that out. I found that really interesting, because I know people spend a lot of time on their LinkedIn profiles and talking about their about section. And for you, it was not you writing it there. It's other people that are kind of filling that in for you. So I found that fascinating.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, that's an interesting observation. I would say that, I have not for a very long time, I'd say since 2002, been an employee or sought a job. So, to the extent that LinkedIn is used for kind of recruiters or, kind of networking with, specific purposes, I don't have those purposes. So LinkedIn to me is just a way to connect with other people, but I'm not trying to sell anything.
Yep, absolutely. That makes
maybe
sense.
maybe I can evolve it over time to kind of prop up my profile, but I haven't.
Makes sense. Yeah, I just wanted to call that out as the person that you are, right? That's really important too. So my next question for you is, can you give me a quick pitch, like a couple sentences and something that a 6-year-old can understand about your company? I kind of explained it a bit, who you're for and what problem do you solve?
Fundamentally, Pre is a consumer brand, and Pre is a consumer brand that is competing in the beef category. Pre has taken a completely different approach than others in the category, because Pre was built from day one as a consumer business. And that means that we try to understand the consumer we're trying to serve. And then we work back from that to make sure that every aspect of the business gives our consumer what they want. So it's a business built on the consumer's terms rather than ours. And fundamentally, it's about, it's a food product. So we have to deliver on what's most important to consumers in food, which is taste, particularly when it comes to beef and the experience that people are looking for from that. But secondarily, it has to deliver on kind of, let's call it, the health and nutrition that consumers are seeking. And thirdly, we do it in a transparent way. That combination of taste, health, and transparency is, what's kind of fundamentally underlying the brand. And as consumers distrust more and more, transparency and truth are becoming more and more valued. And we built our business from day one to be able to do those things.
Awesome. Great explanation of that. And so what's the story behind how you got started?
So, you kind of mentioned, I started my career actually in finance. I went into technology, telecom, both wireless and wired. I worked in mobile payments back in 2001, 2002 for a company that innovated that and sold a MasterCard. So I kind of wasn't in the food business at all. A college roommate of mine whose family was in the meat business and had the oldest meat company in Chicago asked me to help them grow strategically. So we set up essentially a private equity entity to invest their capital in a business, bought a company, and I went from thinking I was going to kind of be let's say an advisor or board member to companies we acquired to they asked me to step in and run this business. So I came into this whole industry with no knowledge of it and a lot of learning to do. So I think that really helped, is that coming from outside, I had a fresh perspective, no pun intended, and learned. And it was a steep learning curve. And, I kind of think that it's about like having an open mind, asking lots of questions, being willing to be wrong, really attracting, the best minds and helping them help you. I just climbed the learning curve of food. But what I learned in the industry is that the industry had, for a long time, in my opinion, kind of taken consumers for granted, and it focused itself on volume and cost, and consumer be damned for the most part. And I kind of said, well, there's got to be a better way. I think we can deliver something better, and created a business within a business to do that. Launched the first organic animal protein brand in the United States called Summers Organic back in 2004, and we were really successful very quickly. And one of the things I learned in that business is that we tried to take an existing business and reposition it towards a consumer opportunity. But like I said, with kind of building a brand that's authentic and is able to execute on the brand across all touch points, I realized that it was going to be near impossible to do. Like, you can't take a company that thinks in terms of volume and cost and compromise where possible, and try to position it or turn it into a premium consumer brand, because first and foremost are the people, and the people form the culture. The people and the culture just aren't equipped to do that. That just hasn't been how they thought. They just and I think it's tough for people to change. It's tough for a culture to change. And I ultimately sold my interest in the business to my partner and his family, and they subsequently sold the entire business to a much larger company. But I decided from that experience that I learned what the consumer opportunity was, and I learned how to execute on it, and I learned that we weren't well positioned to do that, and I decided to go off and do this on my own from scratch. So that was really, really important to me from the beginning. It's like, I want to build this business from a blank sheet of paper, because I feel like you make decisions really early on in the business that will forever, kind of help or hamper kind of your prospects. And I knew that having acquired a business is that you acquire a business, you acquire its assets, but you also acquire its liabilities. And I would say that typically in businesses, the assets and liabilities that are most valuable and most important aren't the things you see on a financial statement. They are things, people and culture, and and just kind of the psychology of a business, and and how it competes, and how it thinks and solves problems. And I knew that was tough, if not impossible, to transform, and therefore I wanted to do it from scratch. I wanted to build with my way, with my people. And I almost, I basically avoided hiring people of the industry. And I would say to people, I'm like, do you think Tesla hires engineers from Ford and GM? Of course not, because Ford and GM engineers know how to build Ford and GM type cars. And I think the same thing applies, is if you want to solve a problem differently, it's really, really hard, and I would argue almost impossible, to solve that problem with people that have solved the problem the same way for a long time.
Well, you brought up a lot of great stuff here. I just wanted to point out that that's also a great approach to take and a challenging approach to take when people are looking at startups and like, which startup do I join? And you ask them like, what's your retention rate, or what, how much are you making every year? What is your trajectory? What's your monthly recurring revenue, like all these questions, the financials, right? To get a grasp of like, will I make it here? Is this company going to make it? You can't really know. You're kind of still like most of the other stuff that you can maybe ask like employees that are there, like the psychology of the company and the culture and all that is so important too. But you can't find that out until you actually get there. So I like that you
I
brought
mean, it
that up.
depends on kind of what stage of startup we're talking about, but I think that like, people use review sites like Glassdoor, I think is one of them. Like if a company has hired people and been around for enough time to have people, that have been there and left, whatever it is, like you end up getting a sense for what the environment really is. You can kind of talk to people. I would say that really, really importantly, and I think people underestimate this. Investors certainly don't, but employees do. Is like when you're in a startup, the CEO is the most important person, and you have to have confidence in that person. They
Yes.
have to fit your culture, your morals, etc. I think first and foremost, and I think that will determine the kinds of people that get hired, the opportunity that exists there, how well they get funded, because I think that ultimately investors also are betting on the CEO, and then the CEO's job is to create, a great leadership team, and that leadership team then creates the kind of the culture and hires the right kinds of people. But it all starts from the top, and there's a French expression often used in food, which says the fish stinks from the head. And I think that that's true. Is that that top person that is going to determine a lot. The other thing I
Yeah.
get people, this is I coach founders and I talk to people that are looking to get into startups, and the old expression is if you do what you love, you don't work a day in your life. Well, I'd say that that's really important. So like if you're looking at a startup, I think people need to really think about not just, is it a cool job? Is it a great title? Do they pay me a lot of money? But am I going to love coming to work every day? Or now in the COVID world, doing the work every day. I don't know about coming into work. For
Yeah,
many,
that's
but,
right.
you have to love it, because I think if you love it, it makes it that much easier to put all your energy into it, and oftentimes work long hours and overcome difficult problems. Like it's just really, really important.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to ask you now, moving into like the marketing realm, and being the founder of Pre and basically doing everything from day one, and then starting to bring on your team. Um, Thinking about more recently, what was working really well for you? Like what marketing channels worked really well, and maybe you could dive deeper into one or two of them and talk about that.
So, I mean, for us, we really took the approach of, so you think about kind of what the product is. And for us, the product was, steak, ground beef, like basically food. And we found that the best way to, kind of build the brand and build, let's call it awareness and trial, which I think is kind of, let's call it, top of the funnel, if you will,
Mhm.
is to have people try the product. So we did anything we could to get them to try it. We thought the most impactful way to do it, and also most expensive, was through field marketing. So we did anything from sampling in stores to events. We wanted to go where our consumer was, and we wanted them to try the product. And we were convinced that if they tried the product and they learned more about why it is what it is, that they would there would be a high chance that they would buy it. So that's what we did. Significantly from a marketing perspective, we did in retail a lot of kind of promotions and such, because anything we could do to motivate you to try the product. And then if your product is great, you have a chance that somebody will repeat on it. And if they repeat on it, then you have a chance that they're going to buy it again. And ultimately, your goal is to create loyalty. We also did things from a digital perspective. So, we wanted to align with influencers. So I think that it's really, really tough. And I'd say, oftentimes you end up, you buy an audience and you end up buying the wrong audience. And it's, you're basically buying that audience. So the relationship isn't as strong as somebody that's trusted within a network, an influencer of sorts, is authentically talking about your brand and why they love it for themselves, And then that's something that their network learns about and is interested in trying. And, again, ultimately the product has to deliver. But that's kind of how we approached it. We didn't do things as a startup. We didn't have the budgets to do like, what a lot of people think of as marketing as like TV advertising, or like we didn't do, we tried radio. I think we tried even a little bit of outdoor. We tried a bunch of things, but what we found is that, as a marketer, I'm sure you're familiar with, working and non-working dollars. And we found that like creating, these kind of this really, really high cost content, like doing a TV commercial, we were never going to have the working dollars to complement all of the embedded costs, which is the non-working dollars. So you could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars literally creating a commercial. And unless you have millions of dollars on top of that to distribute the commercial, you might as well just, save your money.
That's right.
So, the other thing that we kind of decided is like, there's these agencies, like there's this like mystique around kind of like marketing. You got to hire agencies, and you got these things called retainers and agency of record relationships. And, one of the things I learned is that, at an agency, as with probably any business, you're only as important as the amount of business you do with that business. And, we needed to be more important than we were ever going to be as a startup. And, we ended up kind of insourcing the marketing function because it did a couple of things. One is it had people that were really talented prioritizing the brand and the business all day, every day. It also informed them more than working with an external partner ever could. You work with an external partner, they peripherally know your business, but they don't really, really understand it and the brand and its limitations or opportunities. But people living and breathing that business every day understand it much better. So we learned that it was much more economical and much more effective to build a team and to have those ideas in-house and then figure out ways to exercise those ideas in the market, which are typically either digitally or experientially.
Awesome. Well, again, you uncovered a lot there, which is interesting. You talked about influencers, and I just had on my last show, Gail Eyal. He's a founder of an influencer marketing platform. So it's interesting to like hear you talk about that and hear him talk about his.
Well, funny thing about influencers is I now kind of, when I coach startups, I'm a bit of a contrarian, and maybe as an entrepreneur, that's kind of almost like, by default. But I've always believed that when everyone believes something, it starts to become wrong. When everyone thinks the market's going to go up, the market's higher likelihood of going down. When everyone believes that influencers are the thing, I would say influencers aren't the thing. And the reason is that when everyone's doing it, it kind of dilutes the impact. And I feel like at this stage, I hate to use the word kind of prostitute, but I think marketers, influencers have really prostituted themselves and their networks, and how authentic is the communication and influence that they have. I think it's become much more transactional. And yes, there are exceptions. But if you have to go out there and like buy influencers or buy influence, I kind of wonder what's the impact of that influence.
Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you was, when you're at these field marketing, events and like giving out samples and doing this with your beef, like what does that look like? What's that format look like? Because you have to actually make it. So do you stand there with like the actual?
Yeah, we would. The typical setup would, number one, we would have it staffed by either our people or brand ambassadors that we are really committed to, that really understand the business and spend a lot of time on it. So I think that authentic communication is really important. What we found is that consumers, in this category around products like ours, ask a lot of questions. And if you're sending people out with, a kind of a little card with 3 to 5 bullet points of rinse and repeat, that's just not going to fly, because 99% of the time, whatever, like the questions that are asked are not going to be on that sheet. So you have to have people that actually have real product and brand knowledge that can answer that second, third, fourth level question. And then like we wanted to create a great experience. So we had kind of all the brand assets brought into like tents with visuals of the products. We had to put grilling in, we had to put sanitation, like washing stations in. We had to do all that stuff. So for us, doing demos and stores, or even more doing events, were pretty expensive undertakings.
Yeah.
But the flip side for us was what justified it is that when you're in a category like beef, differently than I don't know, maybe a cereal or a snack bar or whatever it is. It's like people buy it a lot. So your, let's call it revenue and margin opportunity, or the relationship value you have is really, really high. So if somebody is, and I know this just off the top of my head, if the average person is buying beef 36 times a year, every 10 days they're buying it, and they have the opportunity to choose you or choose somebody else, and the lifetime value of that customer is very, very high. So you can invest more in building that authentic relationship up front than you might in another category where somebody buys it twice a year and you're never going to see the return.
Awesome business to be in. I'm sold. You sold me. It makes sense. It just makes sense. Great. So I wanted to ask you then, what would you say, like, what's the main challenge that you were trying to figure out, and maybe you're still trying to figure out, maybe the team there is trying to figure out, what is it that like kept you up at night and it was just like such a challenge. Maybe you overcame it or maybe not.
I just want to be clear is that like I founded and ran the business, from 2012 to 2019. And while I remain a shareholder, I'm no longer actively involved. We brought in a next stage CEO who, has more experience kind of, let's call it administering businesses from some size to scale. So I'm a sabbatical of sorts working on my next one. But I'm happy to talk about kind of that, let's call it dating back to like as recently as last year. So what was the question again?
The biggest challenge that you guys were dealing with, like you guys all had to kind of get your heads together and try to figure something out, or
So
yeah.
I would say our biggest challenge was honestly the category and the industry, like trying to change. It's like trying to change how an industry does business in our own small way. Like we could innovate, we could do all the right things, but the expression that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. We had to work with suppliers, we had to work with retailers, we had to work with brokers, we had to work with all different types of people. And what we found is that all the different people in this industry have never been associated with really executing against a consumer brand. So the discipline that we had in our business that we tried to exact on others that worked with us wasn't something that they were used to accommodating. And when you're small, trying to get people that are much larger than you to change their business, or at least change their business as it relates to working with you, is really, really hard. And I'd say that people can pretend, people can sometimes make changes, but culturally, people, and I think this is true in like everyday life, people tend to fall back to their kind of historical tendencies. So it was that was probably our biggest challenge, is like, how do you work with retailers in a category where there are no real brands and they don't understand how to kind of partner with you in the way that other categories might to kind of support building that brand? How do you work with suppliers that are used to people buying strictly on the basis of price when you're interested in buying on the basis of quality? And you're not willing to accept some of the compromises that all their other customers are willing to accept. It's things like that. It's the culture and legacy that we had to kind of try to work with and overcome to achieve what our consumer expected of us.
I would think that retailers, like the big players now, because they're used to bringing on the brands from other industries, from other categories, it would be kind of like, okay, we're waiting for someone in this category to bring us like a brand for people to really like to attach themselves to and to want to come back to, right? Wasn't that the case?
You would think, and I certainly thought that, and what we discovered in the market is that, retailers, this is true, I think, in fresh products in general, whether it's meats, seafood, produce, there's really little to no brand equity in any of those categories. And that's, that's partially to the benefit of the retailer, because the retailer, the buyer of the category, has a lot of control. They decide what they buy, who they buy from. And once there are brands and those brands build equity with consumers, that shifts that equation, and then suddenly they have to buy from you. So one of the things I kind of realized is that you're selling to a customer and you're doing really, really well with them, and the better you're doing, the more they're concerned that they're giving up power to you, and so that was something that was kind of unexpected.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. So we talked about what was working well for you. We talked about, the challenge that the company was facing. What about maybe like a big aha moment? It could be, in 2019 or prior to that, something where, oh my gosh, now I know this. Now I can really leverage this, like an overrated trend or an underrated marketing tactic. What was an aha moment for you?
I think that the aha moment for me, and the most important aspect of any business for me really comes down to the people. And I learned a lot around the kinds of people that you need in a startup, and I made a lot of mistakes. I would say that the people that were early in the business, the first let's call it 2 years of the business, we completely eliminated them from the business. And the reason is that I went into the business thinking, well, we're building a consumer brand. I need to hire a bunch of CPG people to build a consumer brand. And what I learned was that we were hiring people that come from big companies that have never actually built things. And they've managed things. They're really, really smart people. They go to top schools like yourself. They go to Kellogg or wherever they go, and they come out and they go work for the Crafts and the Pepsis of the world. Well, those are very different businesses. Those are brands that are hundreds of millions of dollars, or in certain cases, billions of dollars. And that's really more about kind of brand management, risk management. Hopefully you can eke out, a little bit more market share, a little bit of growth, and cut some costs and drop more money to the bottom line. But it's not about like, who's our consumer? What should we be saying? Where's our market? Like all the things that you're trying to figure out early on in the business, they have no clue about in general. And then trying to apply the principles that they've applied at large scale to small businesses creates lots and lots of havoc. So he ultimately had to kind of clean house of really talented people that we hired, and brought people in that were successful at companies of our stage, that had demonstrated in the past that they could live and succeed inside a company our stage and grow it, and then hopefully get to the point where the business is large enough where you can kind of attract those people that come from the larger companies that know what it takes to run the businesses at that stage. But stage and people that are right for each stage was a really, really huge lesson. Very, very painful, very, very expensive.
Yeah, well, thanks for mentioning that. I totally hear you on that because I've worked at places big and small, and I experienced that when I was coming from the small to the bigger and trying to move quickly and get certain things done. But then there are barriers that are created by people and created by people's mindsets based on the fact that they've just been doing it a different way. So I think that's real. It just is the way it is, for better or for worse. You need people like that for different stage company, larger company, more
Yeah.
teams, more stuff. But it actually gets in the way when you have a startup and you
I mean,
need those ideas flowing
and
in.
specifically to marketing, I mean, you've worked in companies of different sizes, but what I found is that people that come from like large, kind of marketing functions at companies like, let's say, not to pick on a Kraft or Pepsi, like companies like that, they're very compartmentalized. So it's like they have specific areas of expertise in marketing, and they break out things like brand versus digital, and they break out customer marketing from brand marketing. And when you're in a startup, you kind of need somebody to basically jump in and be able to wear all those hats. And what I found is that there's a lot of specialization there, and they typically rely on all these different subject matter experts, and they bring it all together. They don't actually have a lot of that knowledge themselves, or they'll
Yeah,
rely on site partners like agencies and the like to kind of support their efforts. So again, kind of lesson learned. It's like amazing how many marketers I met that aren't really marketers at all. They're really administrators. A lot of them are almost kind of financial. They just look at numbers and then make decisions purely based on numbers and math versus having any
yes.
real knowledge of a consumer and having kind of the empathy and kind of that, to understand a market segment and how you're going to be meaningful to them.
That's a really great point. So last question I wanted to ask you is, you're working now with entrepreneurs, and you mentioned when I was on the phone with you that it's really kind of crazy to work with entrepreneurs, even though you are an entrepreneur. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs, just looking back on your journey and now that you work with them?
Well, I think that the key learning that I've had in working with entrepreneurs and being one myself is that early on in the business, so let's call it in the startup phases, there are decisions that the entrepreneur is making or the leadership team is making that will forever determine the expected value of the business. When I think of expected value, I think of things like ultimately like the top line revenue, the profitability, the likelihood of achieving it, the speed at which that gets achieved, like all those things get impacted by decisions. And I'd say that it's really, really hard for kind of a founder to know everything. I think that they need to really rely on kind of outside people and actually kind of take that advice. And as someone who has not taken, advice that I should have at various times in my career, I think that's the thing. Find the best people that have been there, done that, and leverage their expertise. And I think that you'll get further faster. I think entrepreneurs feel like their situation is different. They know more than anybody else. So I would say, every situation is different. You probably do know more than other people, but they have more experience than you do. So your job is to basically transfer knowledge to them. So have people that are not peripherally involved. I'd rather have 3 people that are really involved in my business and know it than 10 people that have great resumes that don't know very much and want to show up to a meeting here and there. They can't be that helpful to you. So you end up kind of like, they give you advice because that's what they're in the business of. They think they know a lot. And then you dismiss the advice or you kind of question the advice because you know that they don't really know that much about your specific situation. So I'd say find a handful of the right people, figure out ways to work with them, figure out ways to get them as smart as possible about your business and your challenges, and then kind of leverage their expertise versus learning those lessons yourself. Because learning lessons, we all do. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money, and puts a lot of risk in your business. And if you can mitigate those things, that can only be helpful.
Yeah. Lenny, thank you so much. This has been great. I learned a lot from you. We talked a lot about first, like how people misunderstand marketing and brand. I thought that was awesome. We talked about like hiring the right people, not necessarily from the large companies, especially in the startup arena. We talked about, what worked for you, getting people to try the product, driving awareness and how you did that. We talked about influencers and your thoughts on that, and just in general, different marketing tactics and how they get saturated and then it's time to move on. We talked about the challenges that you had, and then we talked about like your aha moment about people and hiring. We talked about a lot. So I super appreciate all of the value that you brought onto this episode. I'm always so happy to talk to you. You're just like a very positive person and you have so much knowledge. So thank you again. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
That sounds great. I was happy that you reached out to me, and if I can be helpful in any way, you know how to reach me.
Yeah, sounds great. And I'll also include information on how, if people want to reach out to you, I'll include some information too when I put this podcast episode up. So thanks again, Lenny.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.